He is in Turkey right now, unable to be with us. But thank you all very much for traveling long distances and for your time and efforts this week in Jakarta. Perhaps you heard the expression, if you wish to travel faster, then travel alone. If you wish to travel further, then you must travel together. Together, NOAA and BMKG can travel further in our understanding and forecasting of subseasonal to seasonal forecast. Together, NOAA and BMKG can travel further in applying ocean observations and science to benefit our societies and economies, such as climate change, mitigating floods, droughts, and extreme events. So this is my charge to everybody this morning. Please, let's come together for the 100 million citizens throughout the Indo-Pacific region, because what we're doing this morning will significantly beneficial impacts to a large portion of the world's population. In closing, I just wish to thank American Embassy and Sally Lean and Uita for being with us and really helping NOAA to work effectively and mutually beneficially with our Indonesian BMKG colleagues. And with that, I will say, terima kasih. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sidney Thurston, for your remark. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor today to have a representative of U.S. Embassy Jakarta here with us to deliver her remark. Honorable Ibu Sally Lean, Chief Environment, Science, Technology and Health Office of the U.S. Embassy, kindly have the floor.
Hello, good morning. Selamat pagi dan selamat datang. Saya senang sekali saya bisa berada di sini hari ini dengan Bapak dan Ibu. Good morning and a warm welcome to all the participants in this workshop today, the first in-person workshop after the pandemic. I'm so glad to be able to speak with you here today on behalf of the U.S. Embassy, and would like to acknowledge first Director General Dikorita for your leadership and hard work in fostering the 17-year-long partnership. If this partnership was a person, we would be entering the very pivotal teenage years where the person would either go off to college and reach even higher levels of greatness. And I see that parallel with this relationship that we have. And so this partnership that you all have spent 17 years cultivating is about to launch and reach even greater levels of achievement. So that's really happy to hear. I would also like to thank Dr. Sidney Thorson for his expertise, dedication, and partnership and tireless work and hands-on support. To all the esteemed scientists, colleagues from BMKG, NOAA, and beyond, thank you for your efforts to advance our cooperation. We very much value our productive partnership with BMKG as we work together to furthering critical scientific knowledge and innovation. This includes joint research cruises and multiple education and technical exchanges. Specifically, this year's workshop is continuing to focus on ocean weather climate discussions. Research in this field has a clear and critical connection to climate change, which is an area that I spend most of my days working on. And is one of the most urgent and shared challenges of our lifetime. President Biden and Special President Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, have made rising global climate ambition a key pillar of our international and domestic policy. We must take action now to reduce emissions and reach net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. Without immediate and large-scale reduction in emissions of all greenhouse gases, including limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, will be beyond reach. We are already seeing the impact of climate crisis in the form of increasingly severe and extreme forest fires, floods, storms, and rains. Together, our two countries have launched a productive bilateral climate policy consultative process, focusing on cooperation in mitigation ambitions, nature-based solutions, clean energy, and climate finance. Robust, reliable scientific data is essential to all of these efforts. To build resilience and enhance adaptation, and as this partnership embodies, countries integrate the latest climate science into development planning and implementation across sectors and scales and beyond borders. The result, reliable and accurate climate science. I am proud that we are all able to meet in person again this year, and this important work will continue. I wish you all a very productive and enjoyable workshop today. Terima kasih dan tetap sehat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibu Sambilin, for your remark. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda, keynote address by the Director General of BMKG, Ibu Profesor Dwi Korita Karnawati. Time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Terima kasih Mbak Ami atas waktunya. Your Excellency Ibu Sandi Lin, the Chief Environment Science, Technology and Health Office of the U.S. Embassy, and also the Excellencies, colleagues, leaders of NOAA, Dr. Sydney Thurston, Professor Mike McFadden, Professor Chidong Zhang, and Ms. Sarah Sombresher, and Dr. Wasila Thiaw. And here we also have His Excellency Bapak Nugroho from BRIN, and of course Bapak Ibu peserta mini simposium dari semua unit kerja dan unit pelaksana teknis BMKG, ataupun dear colleagues from the research institutions, universities, and other institutions, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Please allow me to give these remarks in Indonesia, in Bahasa, but for the critical parts, I would like to translate briefly in English. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, saya yakin sebagian besar atau paling tidak di antara Bapak Ibu pasti mengetahui cerita sejarah turunnya Al-Quran ke bumi ini yang disampaikan kepada Nabi Muhammad SAW. Diawali dengan kata-kata Iqra, diulang lagi, Iqra, diulang lagi, Iqra. Jadi Iqra, 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 dan waktu itu Nabi nampaknya tergagap-gagap ya. Ini menurut cerita guru agama saya ini. Mohon maaf kalau ada yang salah, kalau saya salah menyampaikan. Apa itu artinya? Saya yakin semuanya sudah mengerti ya, terutama yang yang Muslim ya. Bacalah. Jadi Allah pun memerintahkan Muhammad dan tentunya umatnya untuk bacalah. Jadi selalu membaca, bacalah, bacalah. Artinya agar kita ini selamat, terutama selamat di dunia dan insya Allah juga di akhirat ya, itu kita harus membaca, bacalah. Dan di era milenial ini, Iqra itu melalui teknologi, melalui science and technology, itu sebetulnya menjalankan perintah Allah. Bacalah dengan science and technology. Jadi seluruh yang dilakukan dalam kegiatan di BMKG ini, baik untuk perakiraan cuaca, analisis, prediksi, proyeksi, itu pasti dengan Iqra, dengan bacalah. Membaca dengan satelit, membaca dengan radar, membaca dengan memasang alat-alat, itu sebetulnya kita berusaha untuk Iqra. Untuk kita ini agar bisa memahami perilaku alam. Ilmu Tuhan itu sangat luas. Sangat luas. Dan kita sudah diingatkan untuk selalu membaca, meskipun rasanya tidak mungkin untuk menguasai seluruh ilmu Tuhan. Makanya ada collaboration. Karena pengetahuan seseorang itu sangat terbatas dibandingkan ilmu yang luas yang dimiliki Allah. Collaboration itu adalah kumpulan dari orang-orang yang bersinergi untuk membaca alam. Maka ada multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, itu adalah penjabaran dari Iqra. Kenapa sampai ada multi-interdisciplinary, ada collaboration? Karena ilmu kita yang sangat terbatas, tidak mungkin kita membaca bisa menguasai semua. Dan kita harus dibantu dengan alat dan sebagainya. Sehingga apa yang kita lakukan ini bukan hanya sekedar kerjasama. Bukan hanya sekedar ini untuk kepentingan Amerika. Gitu ya. Bukan. Ini untuk kepentingan BMKG. Bukan. Ini adalah menjalankan ibadah Iqra tadi untuk kepentingan siapa? Selamat di dunia. Kalau di akhirat kan beda lagi, kita nggak cerita di sini. Nah, jadi mohon dipahami, ini adalah mission for the safety of the future planet Earth, future generation, future human life. Jadi what we are doing is not only about cruising, workshop, it's not just that, but with the long-term significant and serious impact for the safety of the future planet Earth, future environment, future human life. Sehingga semua yang terlibat, insya Allah, akan menjadi pahlawan-pahlawan keselamatan bumi. Ya, insya Allah menjadikan amal jariah. Nah, sehingga saya mohon untuk semua saja, colleagues, teman-teman, Bapak Ibu yang terlibat di sini, saya mohon ini dijalankan dengan sungguh-sungguh dan dengan tetap terus continuous, teguh, mendalam ya. Jadi tadi observasi yang kita lihat pada video, itu baru secuil dari pengetahuan Allah. Namun kalau yang secuil ini tidak kita wujudkan, berarti nomor satu kita mengabaikan perintah Allah untuk Iqra, dan kita tidak peduli atau mengabaikan keselamatan bumi, keselamatan umat manusia. Dan bagi seorang ilmuwan yang seperti itu, tentunya tidak patut kita melakukan. Nah, sehingga saya sangat berterima kasih kepada Bapak Ibu semua yang sudah terlibat dalam kegiatan ini, ya, terlibat dalam research atau survei ini, analisis ini, mohon terus dilakukan. Terus terang aja ya, dari segi anggaran, semua kalau ditanya ya anggarannya memang nggak ada, pastilah. Nggak ada, tarik ulur ya, namanya anggaran itu kan tarik sana, tarik sini. Tapi ini demi keselamatan should be number one. Ya, jadi harus gimana caranya kita prioritaskan. Kalau kita saling terbatas, ya kita saling melengkapi. Sehingga kami sangat berterima kasih kepada BRIN yang telah dengan setia dulu BPPT ya, membantu mendukung program ini, dan juga lembaga terkait lainnya ya selain BMKG, tampaknya juga ada LIPI ya di sini, dan juga tentunya NOAA ya, NOAA yang sudah men-share ilmu teknologinya, dan para millennials jangan hanya berhenti di cruising. Itu kan data collection, analisis awal. Tapi itu belum selesai, itu baru awal. Sehingga terus dikaji mendalam menerus, maka berupayalah untuk bisa belajar kalau perlu, dan harus, bukan kalau perlu, harus sampai S3. S3, belajar mau di Washington University, masuknya sulit, ya karena itu top university. Kalau cari mudah, bukan ke sana, tapi bukan itu tujuan kita, ya harus bisa di top university, agar daya analitik kita ini lebih tajam ya. Jangan sampai ilmunya hanya sebatas ilmu dari senior-senior Anda. Senior-senior Anda ini kalau ada cuaca ekstrim udah gagap-gagap ini antisipasinya sebelum kejadian bagaimana ya. Tapi di generasi Anda nanti Anda sudah bisa bersiap-siap 2 tahun sebelumnya, sudah bisa memprediksi bagaimana kondisi ekstrim 2 tahun ke depan. Kenapa 2 tahun? Kalau hanya setahun seperti sekarang itu masih kurang. 2 tahun itu agar program antisipasi prediksi ini bisa masuk dalam penganggaran. Kalau sudah 1 tahun, ini kan anggaran sudah ditok, sudah jalan. Tapi kalau 2 tahun, masih bisa diusulkan, dan seluruh kementerian, lembaga, atau pihak terkait, masing-masing bisa bersinergi, mengusulkan untuk antisipasi 2 tahun ke depan. Jadi minimal 2 tahun sebelumnya, kita harus sudah tahu, ini apakah 2 tahun lagi El Nino. Ini sekarang kita 3 tahun berturut-turut La Nina. Apakah cycle kemudian, ini kita perlu tahu post-3 deep La Nina ini, apakah akan diikuti another 3 deep El Nino, atau apa? Kita masih buta, nggak ngerti. Lalu gimana menyiapkannya ke depan? Ya, nanti tinggal kurang setahun, kurang 6 bulan, baru tahu mau ada El Nino. Nah, anggaran sudah terlanjur diketok untuk yang lain-lain. Sehingga itulah pentingnya ilmu pengetahuan. Membantu kita untuk sedini mungkin untuk bersiap-siap. Sehingga nanti ini saya baca di sini akan ada paparan diskusi tentang the role of the ocean in weather forecasting. Ini basic pengetahuan yang harus kita pahami ya. Dan bahkan ini saya minta Mas Citra diundang ya, Mbak Uke. Nanti kita perlu tulis ulang dengan bahasa populer sederhana, ini biasanya Mas Citra, dan kita sebarluaskan melalui media dan online ataupun cetak ya. Karena kita ini harus mengedukasi publik agar yang peduli jangan hanya sebatas orang atau sebatas ilmuwan, tapi ini masyarakat di kaki 5 yang sedang nongkrong di warung, ya, ataupun ya masyarakat sampai anak-anak itu semestinya harus memahami, karena ini untuk kehidupan kita di masa depan. Jadi bukan konsumsi para ilmuwan secara eksklusif. Ini harusnya nanti coba ke abang becak, ngerti nggak? Ya, makanya bahasanya harus diterjemahkan ke dalam bahasa sederhana. Nah, ini the role of the ocean in weather forecasting. Ini sangat penting. Semua harus memahami ini. Kemudian enhancing marine observation and analysis through MMS1 project. Nah, ini mungkin konsumsinya agak terbatas ya, tapi minimal masyarakat tahu bahwa observasi dan analisis itu harus terus ditingkatkan karena fenomena alamnya semakin kompleks, semakin rumit ya, semakin rumit, kita belajarnya lama, kejadiannya nggak mau nunggu orang belajar gitu loh ya. Kejadiannya terus bertubi-tubi aja. Belum selesai belajar yang ini, sudah kejadian yang berikutnya. Makanya perlu kolaborasi orang banyak. Hingga pembagian tugas tuh. Kemudian ada causes and consequences of the La Nina 2020 and to 2022. Ini kemudian Indonesian climate during triple dip La Nina. Dan juga characteristics of Madden-Julian oscillation during La Nina years, dan forecasting extreme climate. Saya rasa ini semuanya penting, dan mohon nanti mulai disinggung, didiskusikan. Pasca 3 dip La Nina itu, what is the likely climate? Should we go to El Nino directly, or there will be some break, at least 1 year? Hopefully we can have enough preparation for 1 year break to prepare for the next period of El Nino, because according to the study based on data collected by BMKG, before the year of 1980s, the cycle of La Nina El Nino took 5 up to 7 years. But after the year of 1970s, 1980s, after that, the cycle shortened to become 2 up to 3 years. And indeed, the last 3 years, every year we have La Nina. So how would be the next cycle? Will be there immediately El Nino, or the nature needs some break, some enough or sufficient time to restore the condition, then perhaps takes 1 or 2 years, then we have El Nino. If we have El Nino, we must prepare at least 2 years earlier in order to prevent for the victims, prevent from the disasters. So that's why we do expect the scientists need to keep continuing to enhance the capacity for analysis, depend on the capacity in observation. Yeah. Analysis without observation may not really proper, yeah, so that's why we need to improve our capacity in observation, such as through INA Prima, and then we need to know in advance at least 2 years when El Nino will come later. So itulah Ibu Bapak yang perlu kita lakukan. Dan kemarin kita sudah diskusi panjang tentang Human Capital Development Program, khususnya program percepatan pencapaian 500 dokter. Kenapa 500 dokter? Sekarang tuh dokternya hanya 50 di BMKG, itu hanya 1% di antara 5.000. Lalu kita ikroknya gimana ini? Kalau hanya 1%, kalau mata kita ini hanya 1%, gimana bisa ikrok secara mendalam? Kita khawatir kita akan, bahasa Indonesianya apa, bahasa Jawanya tuh kepontal-pontal. Ini bahasa Indonesianya apa ya? Always apa ya? Always never ending surprise, shock. Wow, this again, not ready. We should not be in that situation. So that's why we must accelerate the efforts for survey, for observation, for enhancing the capacity to provide much strong and early analysis. Yeah, so that's why I encourage all the young staff here to work harder, to study harder, to study leapfrogging study to the best university in the world. One of those in Washington Uni. And so please be ready to that. And to prepare that, we have provide a special crash program. We said that crash program because it must be crashing, must be faster, yeah. Because the nature move faster. We must not be left behind and we get the problem. So we have to provide crash program in talent scouting to prepare our young millennials to be more ready, more tough studying abroad. Don't dream to have the convenient life during the studying. I always told them, when you have not yet cried, when you have not yet stressed, that means you haven't done your work proper. So please work harder. Don't worry for having a lot of stress, but that stress is only temporary stress. That stress is just like the engine to push you to work harder and harder and to be patient, to be tough. It's common for everyone. I cried almost every night when I did my PhD. I stress, sometimes fighting with my husband sometimes, just because we need to have time to study, but no one take care of my son. So you take care. So, but finally, we don't regret at all. That's the beauty of being the student. Yeah. So again, thank you very much for all the hard work. I wish you to have very productive and innovative workshop. Yeah. Thank you to NOAA. It has been 17 years. You support us. You empower us. And we do hope this is really what we must do to save the human life in our planet Earth, which is so dynamic. Thank you also US Embassy. Thank you all the partners, BRIN, and perhaps also some universities and LIPI at that time, BPPT at that time. Of course, thank you very much to our colleague, Ibu Nelly Florida, Bapak Urip, Dr. Ari, and Ari Ramdhani, yeah. And many other colleagues, which I could not mention one by one. Of course, also for the millennials gang, yeah, which has been very eager and energized to proceed all this process of Iqra. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Ibu Profesor Dekorita Karyawati, for your inspiring keynote address. Knowledge, science, and technology are indeed our potential power and resources, but to build our capacity to improve our service to public welfare and safety. Ladies and gentlemen, to provide more description about our organization, BMKG, as well as our services, we proudly present the BMKG profile video.
Dedikasi kami untuk negeri tidak pernah terhenti. BMKG selalu hadir dalam memberikan informasi cuaca, iklim, gempa bumi, dan tsunami.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi, ada yang bisa dibantu?
Saya ada undangan.
Oke, baik, silakan Bapak langsung menuju ke lift, kemudian bisa
lihat dari aplikasi info BMKG.
Ini ya.
Cuacanya cerah bro.
Nggak hujan berarti. Bisa lanjut ya?
Lanjut.
Lanjut.
Bapak dan Ibu saat ini sedang merasakan gempa sebesar 7 skala Richter, di mana gempa ini terjadi di Lombok pada tahun 2018 lalu.
Selamat datang di ruangan meteorologi early warning system. Ruangan ini digunakan perakirawan BMKG untuk menciptakan dan memproduksi informasi cuaca, baik itu potensi maupun prediksi dari informasi cuaca di wilayah Indonesia. Untuk cerita satelit Himawari, terdapat potensi kejadian hujan lebat dan pertumbuhan awan di wilayah utara Indonesia, dan untuk wilayah selatan Indonesia terdapat potensi kekeringan dan tidak terdapat potensi atau pertumbuhan awan konvektif.
Selamat datang di Climate Early Warning System di CWS BMKG. CWS ini adalah etalase produk pelayanan iklim, kualitas udara, dan perubahan iklim BMKG. Informasi ini juga bisa diakses di website cws.bmkg.go.id atau juga diakses di iklim.bmkg.id. Kita perlu ketahui saat ini musim kemarau, tapi beberapa wilayah di Indonesia masih terjadi hujan yang relatif basah. Ini bisa
Attention.
Ya, sudah. Silakan Anda bisa bikin banyak respon. Tolong silahkan cek bagaimana hasilnya. Sudah ada proposal. Apakah hanya berupa harus menggunakan logger yang sudah tersedia Ethernetnya. Jadi fungsi di logger hanya tinggal ngirimin aja ke server gitu.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, to capture this memorable moment, we invite you to have a photo session. Kindly turn on your camera and put your best smile. I will count. 1, 2, 3. I will give time to TSO. I will count again. Give your best smile. I will count again. Give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Honorable Professor Karnawati, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the main agenda, to knowledge sharing session followed by discussion. The session will be chaired by Dr. Albert Christian Nahas from Center for Applied Climate Information Services BMKG, and Ms. Jafar Amrina will be the rapporteur. Dr. Albert, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, everyone. Selamat pagi, good morning, all of us. For the first sessions of this Ocean Climate Weather Symposium, I will have the honor to chair the sessions. My name is Albert. I'm the Center for Applied Climate Information Services.
Suaranya kurang terdengar ya.
Maaf, mohon izin Bu, sudah terdengar.
Ya siapa mau kalau nanti ini diambil ya.
Yang lain mohon di mute, jangan bocor. Yang lain di mute, mohon.
Test 1, 2, 3. Is the sound okay now?
Suaranya kecil sekali, Mas Albert. Ya, your voice is small.
Pakai itunya aja.
Tes 1, 2, 3.
Jelas.
Bagus.
Terima kasih. Mohon izin, selamat pagi, morning, all of us. Welcome to the first sessions of the Ocean Climate Weather Symposium. My name is Albert. I am I'm with the Center for Applied Climate Information Service with BMKG. I'm glad to be accompanied by two speakers for this morning sessions. The first speaker is Dr. Sydney Thurston, and joining online we have Dr. Andrew Ramdhani. Without further ado, we will start our first presenter. The first presenter, Dr. Sydney Thurston. He is the program manager for NOAA's Global Ocean Climate Monitoring. He is also the vice chair of World Meteorological Organization's Standing Committee for Earth System Observing and Monitoring Network. His presentation is the role of the ocean in weather forecasting, what we know IOC co-design global basic observing network, or GBON, systematic observations planning facility, or SOF, and unified data policy. Dr. Sydney Thurston, you have 20 minutes for your presentations, and there will be discussions at the end of the presenters after both speakers have given their presentations. And during the presentations, if you have any questions, feel free to send questions through the chat box, and we will address the questions during the interactive sessions. Dr. Sydney Thurston, take it away.
Terima kasih, Pak Albert. Thank you very much. Could we bring the slideshow up, please? Excellent. Thank you very much. Yesterday I was speaking for NOAA as a program manager for the Indian Ocean moored buoy array Rama, and also for NOAA's Global Drifter program. Today, I'll be speaking as my role for the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO Standing Committee for Earth System Observations. So this will be a very high-level view on some very significant developments that are taking place globally at the World Meteorological Organization that have tremendous relevance to Indonesia and to BMKG. So let me take just a few minutes to highlight some of these developments, and then I'll be happy to take questions after the presentation. Next, please. about 1 year ago, the World Meteorological Organization, known as WMO, in Geneva, held an extra plenary conference. It's a 4-year. It's every 4 years they have the extra plenary conference where all 188 member states gather for deliberations. So this is about 1 year ago in Geneva, and they were going to discuss very, very significant changes to the 75-year-old history of the World Meteorological Organization. One was they were going to try to ratify a global basic observing network known as GBON, Global Basic Observing Network. A second major pivotal decision was to ratify Systematic Observations Funding Facility, known as SOFF, whereby developing nations could receive funds to build Earth system observations networks in their country. And a third major development was the establishment of a unified data policy, the first time the WMO data policy has been changed in 40 years. So very significant meeting 1 year ago in Geneva at WMO headquarters. Just prior to that, they wanted a paper on the role of the ocean in weather forecasting. So we put this paper together. This is the title of it, the Global Ocean Observing System, Oceans of Data for Earth System Prediction. You can see the authors here, and I encourage you to Google this title, and it will come up on your website. But so we put this into the WMO Bulletin just prior to that extra plenary meeting. The organizers wanted to get the ocean discussion on the table for this meeting held only every 4 years. So this is the paper, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But that's basically what this presentation stems from, is this paper that occurred in the WMO Bulletin in October 2021. Next, please. This is basically what we're talking about, and I really resonate with Boo Rita's comments. This is critical stuff. This is very significant. What we're working on here is sustainability requires provision of climate products and services to society. So let's unpack this slide a little bit. It starts on the left with observations in the ocean, in the atmosphere, on the land, and on the cryosphere, the ice, the poles, the high altitude mountains. So we get the observations. Those data are assimilated into climate prediction models and also numerical weather prediction models as well. And then those forecasts provide early warning to save lives and protect livelihoods. They help farmers, agriculture, forecast, help health officials. It improves energy decisions, and it also improves transportation. And there is a feedback here. If the models are not right, we adjust the observations accordingly to improve the models for these end users or stakeholders on the right. Next, please. This is a WMO information brief 2021. And this is basically what are the minimum annual social and economic benefits of weather prediction to several economic sectors. So here we can see by improving weather forecast, you can save $29 billion globally every year in energy decisions, $66 billion in disaster management, $25 billion in transportation. I think you get the picture that improving weather forecast not only saves lives, but saves a lot of money as well. Next, please. So after that economic assessment of improving weather forecasts, the WMO launched their Global Basic Observing Network initiative, which we see right here. And one of my jobs at the WMO Standing Committee for Earth System Observations is to make sure that ocean observations are included in the WMO GBON initiative. So we've been working on expansion into the ocean domain to improve weather and climate services. You can see the map on the left is the current status of all Earth system observations. And suffice it to say, the green is the best, and then the other colors are not so good. So the GBON initiative goal is to turn all those observations into green dots. In many areas, the exchange of surface-based observations has been stagnant or declining since 1995. You can see all the browns and the other colors, blacks. They do not meet data requirements. So you have this degradation of observations, but you also have model resolutions increasing by factors of 1,000 to 10,000 since 1995. So this is the motivation for the Global Basic Observing Network. From the ocean side, you can see there aren't many observations included in the GBON initiative yet. We're making very big progress getting oceanobs into GBON. And in fact, we made this recommendation on the bottom for observations that will significantly improve numerical weather prediction, climate forecasting, and also extreme events such as tropical cyclones. Those are, you can see the bullets on the bottom, air pressure and sea surface temperature measurements from drifting buoys, volunteer observing ships, Argo data, and moored buoy data, upper ocean temperature and salinity. So these are the ocean observations we're working to get into the GBON system. And a lot of this is what we're working on with Indonesia BMKG. You can see the moored buoy data. We deployed drifters in the Indian Ocean on the Rama Inaprima cruises. Next, please. So let's take a look at where we are now in 2022. I've been doing this since 1995, and my colleagues here at NOAA have been doing it a lot longer than that. But we've seen tremendous advances in not only the platforms with the sensors, but the sensor technology. The data transmission is just amazing now, getting the data out from these instruments. Since we came on board, we've introduced the Argo profiling system. You can see gliders here, drifters, moored buoys, and then the associated data transmission. And again, keep your mind on that first slide. The goal is to get these ocean data into models to improve forecast. But we've come a long way with technology. It's really a brand new world in observational technology. Next, please. This is the Global Ocean Observing System, known as GOOSE. We're celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. GOOSE has been taking ocean data for 30 years. And these are the observations we want to get into the Global Basic Observing Network, GBON. You can see they're significant. I won't go into all the various networks depicted on the bottom, but lots of observations. NOAA's program, which is about half of what we see here on the map, NOAA, we contribute about half of these. Just our program takes 1 million ocean observations every single day. Next, please. And of course, the Indian Ocean has a lot of science, the monsoons. Next, please. We'll scroll through these quickly. The Madden-Julian Oscillation. Next, please. Next, please. The Indian Ocean Dipole, tropical storms. We'll just scroll through. Thank you. Next, please. So there's a lot of science going on in the Indian Ocean, but these all have tremendous impacts on storms, floods, droughts, tropical cyclones. So there's significant impact from these science events. Next, please. This is the Madden Julian oscillation, and then I borrowed this from Professor Chidong Zhang, who is on the panel with us today. He's one of the leading experts on the MJO. Next, please. But you can see it's in the Genesis region is in the Western Indian Ocean, the Seychelles-Chagos Thermal Ridge, SCTR. And we do have Rama moorings in that area to look at the genesis of the MJO, the diurnal cycle. How does the MJO start? Next, please. It propagates eastward. And of course, how does it propagate across the maritime continent? That's a big science question. Next, please. And then it also affects the Wangpu Enso. And of course, that has significant global impacts. And in fact, if we want to know the weather in Washington, D.C., where I live, in 2 weeks, the MJO goes into the models, and it's a significant factor in weather 2 weeks from today in Washington, D.C. Next, please. This is what Mike and I and Chidong, we've been working on this for 20 years. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary this November of the Indian Ocean Observing System. You can see the Rama moorings in the tropical Indian Ocean. You can see Argo floats, the long yellow cylinders. The NOAA ship Ronald H. Brown was in the Indian Ocean just a couple of years ago with port calls in Goa, India, and Darwin, Australia. And then you can see the surface drifting buoys, the two right buoys on the lower part of that slide. But again, the Indian Ocean has significant science drivers, significant societal impacts. So we need to get the ocean observations right in the Indian Ocean. Next, please. This is a partnership we've been working on for almost as long as we've been working with Indonesia. We've been working with India's Ministry of Earth Sciences since 2006. This is the Rama Omni Array, and this is the Indian Ocean Data Portal. You can Google that, you can go online, and for any one of these moorings and sensors, you can get vertical profiles of temperature, salinity, currents. You can get surface meteorological data, winds, humidity, pressure, temperature, rainfall, and radiation. You can get three-dimensional wave parameters, so that would be direction, wave height, and also wavelength or frequency. And these moorings are in the central Indian Ocean, they're in the Bay of Bengal, in the Eastern Arabian Sea. We're very proud of this. When Mike and I started this 20 years ago, there was basically there were no observations in the Indian Ocean. And now we have the Indian Ocean Data Portal. So again, I encourage you to Google that and go in and start taking data from the Indian Ocean Data Portal. Next, please. This is a very significant development. This is the WMO, World Meteorological Organization, and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, the IOC, working together on the GOOS co-design. So what does this mean? This means identify an exemplar such as tropical cyclones, which of course is a WMO domain. And how can the WMO work more closely with the ocean community to improve tropical cyclone forecasting? And this is something I've been working on with NOAA for the last 3 years. You can see the NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft on the right panel. And we are now going into these storms, and we're deploying instruments in front of the storm into the ocean to look at the upper ocean heat content to improve hurricane intensity forecasting. So this is the co-design concept of the WMO and the IOC, the ocean and the weather community working together. And that's the title of this presentation, The Role of the Ocean in Weather Forecasting. And this is going to be a significant improvement including ocean observations into the WMO. Next, please. With that, taste, that's just an overview, but I would like to thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Terima kasih.
All right, terima kasih. Thank you, Sid, for your presentations. Before we move on to the second presenter, I would like to highlight some of his remarks. He talks about the importance of observations for modeling early warning and sectoral deformations, and then the foundations of WMO global basic observing network to improve weather forecasts, especially the expansion into the ocean domain, where a lack of data has been collected as of now. And he also talks about the use of state-of-the-art observational technology, particularly for ocean observations and the implementations of the global ocean observing system. For the audience joining online, if you have any questions, feel free to send questions through the chat box. We will address the questions during the interactive sessions. But for now, we will move to the second presenter, Dr. Andri Ramdhani. Pak Andri, sudah bergabung dengan kami.
Sudah, Pak Mas Albert.
Terima kasih. Thank you. Dr. Andri Ramdhani is the head of Division for Marine Meteorology Information. He's with the Center for Marine Meteorology at BMKG. His presentation is titled Enhancing Marine Observations and Analysis Through the MM1 Project. Dr. Andri Ramdhani, the time is yours.
Thank you for the moderators. Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu semua. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang saya hormati Ibu Kepala BMKG, Ibu Prof. Dikurita, Bapak Ibu Deputi, Bapak Kapus, Bapak Ibu semua peserta. Ladies and gentlemen, the participant of the 17th annual Indonesians BMKG NOAA workshops, allow me on this opportunity to present our latest work regarding the improvements of marine meteorology services through the MMS1 project, or we call it, it's just the marine meteorological systems. So if we take a look of these maps and also diagram, given that Indonesia, of course, we as are in the country, our position between the Indian and the Pacific, it give the impact of the variability of the weathers and climate across the country. Land and sea interactions, of course, is the most crucial topic to be considered on both climate and weather analysis scales in Indonesia. Besides that, as we see in the map from the ice data, around 8 up to 9,000 per day vessels across or passing in Indonesia seas, and also based on the research reveal that the marine traffic as the third largest contribution of the total DGP of Indonesia. This fact, of course, it challenges to BMKG providing the reliable and accurate marine and climate services to support all marine sector, including transportation, fisheries, and all its relatives. Of course, it's need to improve the accuracy and weather and ocean prediction to accept this challenge. So that's why BMKG starting in 2020 established the program we name as the Marine Meteorology System. Is the major project at BMKG and also as a national priority to strengthen our national marine meteorology services through development of marine observation infrastructure and forecasting technology. This will bring the end-to-end system from the observations, data processing up to the production and disseminations. Through the program, we will ensure to establishing the foundations of the modernizations marine meteorology system to support public transportation sector via development of the modern and integrated supporting facility for marine data collection and forecasting system. The strengthenings of all these programs will be gradually over 4 years, which include the procurement of the integrated and comprehensive all value chains of the meteorology data processing from the observation up to the production and disseminations systems. So the MMS itself divided into 4 main pillars scope of work. It includes the observation systems, forecasting and production system, IT infrastructures, and of course the transportation services. On the observation system, we have to ensure that it encompasses the delivery, field installation, and operation support, including the maintenance and data collection services, such as from the mobiles, instrumentation, drifter, Argo float, and of course also from the fixed station, for instance, the marine automatic weather survey SF radar. And the second ones, in the forecasting and production system, in this component, we will develop the models that will cover Indonesian maritime domains, include the ocean, wave, and atmospheric models, and in the production section will be develop the products that tailored by end user to their specification, and provide with end user operational access to product and disseminate. And to support all the modelings and the production or processing system, of course, we need to improve also our IT infrastructure and communications with the new our supercomputings. It will be run and host the models, the high resolution model for all Indonesians maritime continent. And the last is we have to ensure also after the project and over the projects, BMKG can able to maintain independently with the service we call transversal service, include the integration service and inside of the transversal service we have the capacity building, not only training and also mid training, but also we have some degree program for the doctoral program and the master programs. So it is the MMS one with the numbers. So start with the observations. We will install the various observation, fixed mobile station, and of course the important things we will implement the first coupling models with the large area in the regions, maybe in the Southeast Asia, or maybe in Asia, to implement the coupling atmosphere and wave ocean. And this model will be ingested or be assimilated with the observation that coming into the programs. And the other hand, also we need to improve the forecast productions to make sure that all the products will be accessible to the public, and of course will be meet all their needs in terms to support their operation, especially in the marine sectors. Is based on the map. This is the map from the Global Ocean Observation Network. As we can see that the density of the ocean observations in Indonesia is still lacking. It will to support BMKG operation. And also we already see on the Sydney presentation from the GOES map that's very like observation, especially in the inner Indonesian Sea. This is so that's why we in this program to deploy the very like instrument equipments, mobiles as a standard of the GOES through the ocean drifter and Argo floats. So the ocean drifter and Argo float is the standard observation from the GOES program to obtain the data for instance, the sea surface temperature and also the surface current, salinity, and temperature per depth layer of the water depths. If we take a look on in the global drifter program, over 30 years, over 30 years drifter program from the GCOMS and the GOES is only limited data can prove to the inner Indonesian seas. For instance, from 6,000, the equipment that deploy around Indonesia is only few. Let's say for 30 years, only 48 can prove to the Java Sea, Makassar, Maluku, and Lombok. It's because our Indonesian's water is very shallow, so that's why it's trapped from the global program for drifter and float is trapped in the South China Sea, and also for the floats, it's very limited data. So that's why through the MMS program, we will improve the observations through the drifter and Argo float in inner Indonesian Sea. This is very rare data because, as already explained it in the global program, the drifter and float never coming to Indonesian Sea. Very limited data to come. So that's why the data from Indonesia is not revealed, especially in the real time of the sea surface temperature, sea surface current from the observation in situ. Through the MMS one, we will deploy around 74 drifter and 48 drifter within 4 years from 2020 up to 2024 in those locations, mostly in the Indonesian inner seas. Start from the Kalimata Strait and Natuna Strait, Java Sea, Makassar Strait. In Makassar Strait is very important strait for the Indonesian trout flow. We will install drifter and float, and also the Banda Sea and the Flores Sea. We already deploy in first page in this March up to May 2020. We start with the 15 drifter and 10 Argo floats in Karimata, Banda Sea, Rio, West Banda, and Karimata Strait. And here is after 6 months deploy, as we can see, we're very optimistic. From the 15 and 10 drifters, only 20% loss of the data due to some pickup by the fishermen and sink into the islands. As we can see, that here's the status October 2022 from 15 drifter and 10 floats in Karimata, Rio, Banda Sea, and Makassar. As we can see in the Makassar Straits, it's very interesting. We deploy in the northern of Makassar Strait the float and drifters. It will be great contributions in terms of to identify the ENSO, because in this area is channels, transport to from the Pacific Ocean into the Indonesian Oceans. We invite the scientists from BMKG, maybe from PRIN, to use this data, and of course we will together to in terms to improve the analysis of the weather and ocean related to air and sea interactions. This is the instrumentation that I already mentioned before, coming from the Marine Automatic Weather Station. We will install entire Indonesian territory or Indonesian port to support the navigation and vessels operations to give the real-time data observations. And this is for the FOS, vessel automatic weather stations, these mobiles, to provide the real-time data through the ship, and we can monitor as a real-time the weather's parameter and also the oceans. And then this is the XF radars. We install also to support the transportation, we will install our two main straits, Sunda Strait and also the Lombok Strait, to support the marine transportations. And it's the important ones in the MMS one is we develop, as I already mentioned, is the couple atmospheric oceans online of the model. Is include three of the models, include the wave model, the ocean model, and the atmospheric models. And each model will give its parameter to update the parameter, and we hope can improve the accuracy, not only for the ocean, but of course for the weather, for the atmosphere, because this is our first time to compute ocean parameter into the model as a real time, not only based on the model, but also from the observation coming from drifter and float will ingest to the models, and we hope the dynamic change of the oceans can captured by the atmospheric model. This will give the accuracy of the model of the precipitation also, and for the sea surface temperatures. This is the primary results. We already test the models. For instance, for the wave, compare with the long track altimeter data, it give good agreement with the observation. And also, this is the interesting one. After we coupling the model, the ocean model with the atmosphere model, from our preliminary result that demonstrate that there is enhanced oceanic mixing from the air sea wave coupling produced on SST cooling at certain location. For instance, this is in the location in the Banda Sea and the Java Sea, and it has significant impact on the surface heat, moisture, and momentum flux. I think this very good contribution also, and will give us new analysis in terms we can adapt for we can mitigate for the extreme and climate extremity in the futures. So it's some primary research that since the ocean current from the model will be inputted by the tide, as we know that Indonesia's water is very huge tide mixing variable, so that's why it's can impact the surface current. From this simulation, we can see that the current very impacted from the tidals, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia. This is a good signal for us to be able to continue this works, and we plan this will be available in the 2023, in the mid 2023, and start to be the operationals. And also from this program, we will complete with the trajectory model driftings. It will be useful for the sea and rescue operation and support for the oil spill mitigation as well. And this is our infrastructures, the IT with the models. Of course, we need to improve also the IT infrastructures. And the ends from the projects, as from the titles, we will ensure will be as a foundation for BMKG to provide the integrated forecasting and analysis system. At least we have 7 scores from the MMS one, and here's the 7 goals. First is, of course, to improve the accuracy, improve marine material observations, network cover the entire area of Indonesia that reliable, integrated, user-friendly, and accessible to the public. Enhance BMKG capabilities to support all marine sectors and governments, policy with reliable integrated marine practitioners, improving the understanding of phenomena related to the air-sea interaction and its role in the variability of the weather and climate in marine continent. Enhance human resource capability to manage mid-ocean data and its operation, contribute to the improvement of public safety in national marine sector. And last is contribute to the global ocean observatory network through data exchange and join the international program, for instance, GOES, Oceanops, and DBCP. And here is the timeline. We expect this program will be finished in the end of 2024. Thank you for your attention. And I give the floor back to the moderator. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Dr. Andri for presentations. Some of the highlights of Dr. Andri's presentations is the initiations on MS1 project in relation to the need to improve observation systems and the accuracy for forecasting purposes. The MS1 project itself is the project to strengthen national marine net surface through development of various programs such as observation infrastructure, forecast and production system, IT infrastructure, and communications and the transversal services. He also talks about the implementations of MS1 through deployment plan in 2022-2024, and some preliminary results for both observations and modeling framework, which I'm sure if you have any questions related to the preliminary results and other topics that he has mentioned during his presentations, feel free to ask your questions. And now we have the time to have some discussions in this interactive sessions. We will open the floor to everybody who has any questions to both speakers. I have seen some of the questions through the chat box, but if you have questions and if you want to deliver questions online, just you can use the raise hand options on the Zoom platform, and you can ask the question directly to either speaker. There's a question from Dr. Urip Haryoko, and the answer is already provided by Sid, but if you can briefly talk about the way forward of the programs and how these collaborations will continue in the future.
Terima kasih, Pak Albert, and thank you very much for your question. I responded earlier to the question about how it's actually NOAA and BMKG. Basically, the Indian Ocean Rama mooring data and the Global Drifter Program data and the Argo data, they are in this new, well, they've been going out via the WMO Global Telecommunication System for a couple decades now. The Indian Ocean Data Portal at India's National Center for Ocean Information Services is a new development, just about 1 year. And I did put the link in there, whereby you can go on and get all the Indian Ocean Rama Omni data. So the next step is for the observationalists to work more closely with the modelers. That's something that people assume it's happening, but when you really look into it, the modelers, they don't know the data are there, and it's a real science to assimilate ocean data. ODA is ocean data assimilation, to make sure that the right data gets. And that's where you need this really close connection between the observationalists taking the data and the modelers. And then you also need to understand the physics, the thermodynamics, to make sure that the models are actually capturing the real situation between the atmosphere and the ocean interaction. I would open it up also. I invite the NOAA team here, Chidong, Mike, Sarah, to comment as well. if you had any comments or any response. I see Chidong, please.
I would like to thank Paul Andre's presentations. I'm so excited to see the BMKG is now making efforts to fill the data gap in the Indonesian Sea. And as we all know, BMKG already has a excellent land-based surface network, including radars, automated weather stations, rain gauge, and now you are expanding the observation network into the ocean in the region. And looks like you are on the correct trajectory to make this region one of the best in the world to have both land and ocean observation coverage. And this is very exciting. So my question to Paul Andrew is, you already mentioned that you have finished the phase 1 of MMS1 project. My question is, during the phase 2, is your deployment for both Argo, especially for surface drifters, in terms of time and location, flexible, or they are pretty much fixed?
Hello, Dr. Chidongs. Let me to answer. Yes, as already mentioned, that we already released our first batch of deployment drifter and floats. Yeah, based on our evaluations, we will evaluate some area that already defines earlier before deploy. I already show also our deployments maps. For your question, it's very flexible, of course, and we will also merge this deployment with the NOAA program, for instance, for the INA Prima. Maybe in the next year, IMA Prima, we will also bring our drifter and float in the western of the Sumatra during the cruise. And also we need input from NOAA, where's the location, the interest area, beside that already our defined. So and we also will develop the portals, the data portals in Indonesia for Indonesian waters, not only the MMS1, maybe also coming from the INA Prima program and some research program that already conduct for instance the WMC and MINTI programs will include in the MMS1 platform. We invite also to integrate all of the data. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. My second question is, you mentioned you have this atmosphere wave ocean coupled model. Is that model currently running in real time? Can you get a real-time model output?
Okay. At this time, we still in the development phase. We still test and simulate the model with the certain months numbers, but of course, in the future, in the next years, in the mid 2023, schedule this model will be operational and will be real-time accessible, and the time step of the model will be 1 hour, the time steps, and the validity up to 10 days of the forecast. And in BMKG scientists also will plan to have the hindcast data from this model to running the reanalysis data to provide the data set, that's a long-term data set in terms for the research and analysis purposes. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew.
For the second question, what is the role of oceans in increasing the accuracy of weather predictions and the emergence of El Nino, La Nina? I'd like to get right to the expert on that. If I could ask Mike McFadden just to say a few words on that, please, Mike. And Mike will be addressing that in his presentation very soon also. But please, Mike, thank you.
Right. Well, on seasonal timescales, the ocean is absolutely critical for understanding and forecasting ENSO and, all kinds of different modes of climate variability. It's the upper ocean heat that is the memory of the climate system and provides the source of predictability for these phenomena. And ENSO is probably the premier example of where measurements of the ocean in the subsurface layers provides the ability to look forward in time, several seasons in advance. I like to say, to see the future, you have to look below the surface. And that's especially true of ENSO, but many of these climate phenomena. So on these timescales, anything longer than a season, the ocean is absolutely essential. And even on the shorter timescales, seasonal, subseasonal, the subseasonal timescale, certainly the mixed layer is important. And because that's controlling ocean atmosphere interactions that help to organize and generate the MJO and other kinds of interseasonal variability. So it's very critical to be making sustained ocean observations for seamless weather to climate prediction.
Thank you. Thank you, Shilong, Dr. And we have some time to have more questions. And while we are waiting for more questions, I'd like to invite Dr. Andy to talk about challenges. Oh, we have some details. Oh, BMKG, Ibu Rita, do you have any questions or remarks that you want to address? Please.
Masih mute, Ibu. Ibu masih mute.
I'm sorry, just short questions. I'm always being asked by the member of cabinets, that's including presidents and ministers. They request, could we predict the climate, especially potential occurrence of El Nino, at least 2 years in advance? So that will allow our country to have proper preparations. Due to the cycle of budget allocation must be prepared in our country at least 2 years in advance. So hopefully these efforts by leading scientists in the world could help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Ibu Nikorita Kamawati. I'll invite the panelists here. We have the experts, either Shilong or Ryan, if you have any thought on having use of predictions of El Nino for 2 years in advance?
Yes, actually. I mean, this is an emerging area of science, and particularly with regard to ENSO, there is the potential for multi-year forecasts, and it has again to do with the upper ocean heat content. And actually, I'll say a few words about this in my presentation later. It actually didn't work for 2022, but in principle, the storage of heat below the surface may give us longer than 1 year lead time on ENSO prediction. So, and it's because, I mean, the longer you can look into the future, the more time you have to prepare, to mitigate against some of the more adverse impacts of climate variability, or to take advantage of some of the benefits that it can bring. I mean, it's not always bad news. So, but this is an emerging area of climate science, and there's a community of people looking at this very carefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add what Mike just said, I'm going to briefly touch upon this topic in my presentation later. There is a phenomenon in the tropical stratosphere which is called biennial or quasi-biennial oscillation. And that means about every 2 years, the stratosphere zonal wind direction will change, and it will propagate from the stratosphere to the top of the troposphere, and that will influence the behavior of the Mendel-Julian oscillation. So based on that, there's a possibility to predict the behavior of the MJO 2 years in advance. So that just adds what Mike just said. So there's a possibility that we can advance our prediction skills with a lead time of 2 years, taking advantage of all our knowledge. Of course, there's still a lot of research need to be done.
Both Ron and Shillong for your insights. You will have your presentations and you will talk more about that during the sessions. We do have a few minutes to discuss more. Probably I will invite Sid to talk about the success story of the joint effort between the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services with NOAA, and how we use the success story to improve our collaborations between NOAA and BMKG here in Indonesia.
Excellent question, Paul. Thank you very much, Albert. Yeah, I put the link into the chat box, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity to build the bridge between what NOAA has been working on with India for almost 2 decades and also what we've been working on with Indonesia for 2 decades. So let's start talking together. I encourage you to please take a look at that link. It's for the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. Mike McFadden and I were just in Hyderabad a couple of weeks ago talking with our Indian colleagues. But, ocean, climate, weather, they know no boundaries, right? So the more we can start working together, we'll build this wonderful synergy between Indonesia, US, India, and, share ideas, improve the models, build up the observing system, and we'll get a better understanding, and we'll be improving forecast. As Mike says, the longer lead time you have with the forecast, the longer time you have to prepare. So I'm very excited about this moment in time, and Albert asked that question. I would like to start all of us working together, not just NOAA working in one silo with India, NOAA working in one silo with Indonesia, but let's take this opportunity to all start talking and working together. And I think a good first step is to take a look at that Indian Ocean data portal that I put in the chat box. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sid. Is there any questions from the audience? Everybody would like to ask questions. You can use the raising options. In the meantime, it's probably Dr. Andri. Can you talk more about the challenges that you have during the deployment of the first phase of the MS1 project? And you have already discussed about the future of the second phase of the program, and how the phase 1 translates into the second phase of the programs for these whole cycles. Please, Dr. Andri.
Hello. Yes. Sure. Yeah. We talk about the program to deploy the drifter and float. Is it correct, Pa Alberts? Yes. Hello.
The challenges of the challenges of the deployment of the first phase of your the MS1 project.
Okay. Sure. The challenge of the deployments. Yeah. So, since we know that we will deploy several equipments, yeah, around 150 up to 100 the equipments. So of course it will give us the challenges, not only the timings of the when it will deploy, and also the locations. For instance, in the drifter and float deployments, we will focus in the inner Indonesian Sea, and the location itself, since the drifter and floats will be driven by the surface current. Of course, we have to consider the current patterns of the Indonesian Sea, and of course, the challenge is the time limitation of the projects. And since the project is limited by the time, so we have to make sure that all the equipment, all the system will be installed at the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of the first sessions. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Sid and Dr. Andrew for your presentations, and also because of the beauty of this panel, we have experts from Insight from Mike and Chidong, and help us to more information on the dynamics of this oceans forecast. We have learned from the first sessions is that the importance of the ocean forecast, especially in the Maritime continent, where the observation is lacking. So with these discussions and the deployment of the investment project, we hope that the improvements of the forecast and the ability of BMKG to provide data for scientific community and public in general will have the maximum benefit. And thank you for your participations, and we will continue for the second sessions after this shortly. And in the meantime, I will hand over to Ibu Ani as the MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Albert and Ms. Dava, also Dr. Sydney Thurston and Dr. Andrew Hamdani for the interesting session 1. Let us give applause for our speakers, moderators, and rapporteurs of this session. Ladies and gentlemen, we have more than 600 participants that attending the symposium and accessing the room using Zoom and YouTube access for your attention. This session will be more interesting, but for continuing our agenda, I would like to inform the participant and all audience that the attendance list has been available and provided in the chat rooms. You are invited to fill it in order to proceed the certificate of attendance. Professor Kamawati, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed with session 2. It will be as interesting as the first session. Let us welcome our chair for this session, Dr. Supari, and the rapporteur, Mr. Siswanto. Dr. Supari, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Mbak Ami. Yang saya hormati Ibu Kepala Badan, Profesor Dr. Dwi Karnawati, Bapak PLT Deplim, Bapak Dr. Dodo Gunawan, Ibu Kapus Diklat, Ibu Dr. Nelly Prulida, dan dear participants, together with Pak Siswanto, I will be lead of this second session. We have a topic which is very interesting. It's about La Nina. The current La Nina is very unique because it's occur continuously up to 3 years. So we will have a lecture with our expert. The first expert from NOAA is Professor McPayden. He is a senior scientist of NOAA Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory. Has more than 200 publications in the high reputation journal. So this is a perfect time for us to discuss about La Nina. The second one will have expert from BMKG, which is Dr. Amsari Setiawan. So he is our expert from the Center of Climate Change Information in the field of climate variability. And the next one, we will have Professor Sidong Zhang. He is also the senior scientist from a leader of Ocean Climate Research Division of the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory. And he is currently co-leading the international program of maritime continent years. So, dear participants, in the last one we have Dr. Wasila Tiao. I think he will deliver a presentation online. We'll talk about the forecasting of climate extremes. So, to be effective, I will invite our first expert, Professor Mike Payden, will discuss about causes and consequences of the current La Nina. So, Professor.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is El Nino and La Nina. And let's see, can we have the slides? Oops, no? Okay, there we go. Can we put it on full screen mode? Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to talk about causes and consequences of the 2020-2022 La Nina. And before I get into that, though, I just want to say a word about the picture you see. I took this picture on the Barunajaya 8 in a Prima Rama cruise in 2017. And I really love this picture because it shows both the ocean and the atmosphere, but it also shows a rainbow, which is, I think, symbolic of our working relationship between BMKG and NOAA over the past 10 years or so. So, okay, so next slide. Okay, El Nino and the Southern Oscillation, or ENSO. This is the strongest year-to-year fluctuation of the climate system on the planet. And it originates in the tropical Pacific through interactions between the ocean and the atmosphere mediated by wind and sea surface temperature feedbacks. The warm phase of ENSO we refer to as El Nino and the cold phase La Nina. It's a fascinating scientific problem that has challenged the community for 60 years or more. But what really motivates a lot of the research is on ENSO is the tremendous socioeconomic impacts it has around the world through influences on the human and natural systems. And the middle panels there show the fingerprint, the global fingerprint of ENSO impacts for both warm and cold phase at the peak season of development, December through February. And these essentially represent shifts in the probability of certain kinds of weather patterns, droughts, floods, heat waves, and other extreme events. And the bottom panel is specifically for La Nina. And you can see that, you know, one of the classic signatures is a very wet Western Pacific, heavy rainfalls in Australia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, dry along the equator further to the east where it's cold. And in North America, we have unusually dry conditions in the southern tier of the United States. And where I live in the Pacific Northwest, it's typically wet and cold during La Nina winters. So we've had 2 years of La Nina conditions in the tropical Pacific. Can we see any of these impacts? And next slide, please. And the answer is unequivocally yes. I mean, you have experienced it firsthand here in Indonesia. Australia has seen record rainfalls. I like this headline, rain bombs hitting Melbourne and Sydney. In the US, we've had severe to extreme drought over large portions of the southwestern US. And where I live, it's been a very rainy winter and spring. And this has gone on for 2 years. So this is one of the consequences of extended La Nina conditions. extreme events around the world associated with them. So next slide. So here are the current conditions. These are September 2022, last month. And basically we have cold sea surface temperature anomalies in the equatorial Pacific and intensified water circulation and dramatic shifts in the rainfall patterns. So the start of our show is on the left panel. You can see this large area of cold sea surface temperature anomaly. In some restricted areas, it's colder than 2 degrees below normal. And associated with that, you can see in the lower right, the intensified water circulation. The trade winds are stronger at the surface, and the westerly winds aloft are also stronger. That's an indicator that the water circulation has accelerated. And in the top right, you can see the rainfall patterns. This is basically, it's outgoing long-wave radiation, but it's an index for rainfall. It's very wet in the Western Pacific, as you know, here in Indonesia, but also Australia and the Philippines. And it's very dry in the Central Pacific. That's because the convection, which normally sits over near the date line, has shifted westward away from the cold water of the Central Pacific. It's also dry north and south of the equator in the Eastern Pacific, and this is an indicator that the intertropical convergence zone and the South Pacific convergence zone have migrated poleward away from the cold water of the Central and Eastern Pacific. So next slide. So we have many indices that we use to deviations from normal in the Central Pacific, where the overlying atmosphere is particularly sensitive to changes in sea surface temperature. And this index correlates well with global impacts, which is one of the reasons it's used frequently. The record starts in 1980 and it goes to last month. The red peaks are the El Niños of the last 42 years. You can see 82, 83, 97, 98, and 2015, 16. Those are the big events. And then the blue troughs, those are the La Niñas. And right at the end of the record, you can see our double dip 2020 to 2022 La Nina. Now, an important characteristic of the ENSO cycle, and next slide, please, is what we call ENSO asymmetry. It's because of nonlinearities in the system. El Niños tend to be stronger as a group, and you can see that by I, but La Niñas tend to last longer. Also, you can see that by I. Many La Niñas last for 2 years, and in rare circumstances, like in 1998 to 2001, they last 3 years. So you have double dip and sometimes triple dip La Niñas. So what I want to do is make a composite La Nina, and I'm going to take this record and chop it up into 3.5-year segments. So next slide. Let's chop it up into 3.5-year segments centered around the peaks of La Nina events, but extending back in time to catch the antecedent conditions. So next slide. So these are 10 records, or 10 La Nina events going back to the 1950s. And each one is starting July, the year before the first minimum, and extends to January, 2 years after that first minimum. And it's kind of a messy plot, so I'm going to simplify it a little bit. Next slide. Okay, so here we've taken off most of the lines. The thick black line is the average of all those La Nina events. And you can see that starting the year before the La Nina, we have an El Nino on average. It's a fairly, it's 1.5 degrees. I'd call that a moderate strength El Nino. And then that's followed a year later by a first cold phase. And then in many cases, a second cold phase 2 years after it. And these are what we call the double dip La Ninas. Now, the colored lines, these are La Ninas that followed the 3 biggest El Ninos of the past 40 years, 82, 83, 97, 98, and 2015, 16. And in each of these cases, we had a double dip La Niñas. And next slide. In the past few years, there's been papers written about this, and the conventional wisdom now is that the stronger the preceding El Nino, the more likely it is that it will be followed by a double dip La Nina. And so there are two questions then that arise, and the first one is, what are the mechanisms that allow this to happen? Why is it that a stronger El Nino will more likely be followed by a double dip La Nina? That's the first question. The second question is, if you look at 2020 to 22, it was only a marginal El Nino that preceded this event. It was not like 82, 83, or 97, 98. So what happened in this case? Because obviously this was not a strong antecedent El Nino before this current double dip La Nina. Okay, so let's address the first question. Why is it more likely that you'll have double dip La Nina following a strong El Nino? So next slide. And for this, we want to invoke the recharge oscillator theory. This is a very elegant theory that Fei Jin proposed about 25 years ago for the cycle of warm and cold events in the tropical Pacific. And I'm going to illustrate some key features of this theory with two time series. One is the Nino 3.4, that's the blue line. We saw that before. And the other one is a measure of upper ocean heat content, which is just the average temperature anomaly from the surface to 300 meters depth between the coast of South America and the coast of New Guinea. So averaged all the way across the basin between 5 north and 5 south. You can think of this heat content index as a measure of the thermocline depth. So if it's a very high heat content, the thermocline is deep, and if it's a very low heat content, the thermocline is shallow. So the first key feature of this theory is that a buildup of excess heat content along the equator is a necessary precondition for El Nino to occur. And you can see that very clearly, particularly in the first part of the record. If you just focus on 97, 98, you see the red line precedes, which is the heat content, precedes the blue line, which is the sea surface temperature, by about 6 months. So that's the buildup of heat in 96, late 96 and early 97 before the peak sea surface temperature. The second important feature of this theory is that El Nino purges excess heat to higher latitudes as it's underway, and this terminates the event. And if it overshoots and leaves a deficit of heat, this will lead to the onset of La Nina. And you can see that again with the 97-98 event. After the heat content peaks in early 1997, it precipitously drops. It way overshoots zero and goes into deep negative territory. Subsequent to that, you see La Nina conditions develop. That's because the thermocline is so shallow. So the purging of excess heat from the equatorial band returns the El Nino to normal, and in some cases, the overshoot leads to a subsequent La Nina. And the third important point here is the time between El Ninos is the time that it takes to recharge the equatorial band with excess heat. So if we look at 97, 98, it was such a huge deficit. It took 3 years for that equatorial band to recharge with enough heat in order to precondition the onset of the next El Nino, which was in 2002. And that's why we had a triple dip La Nina in 1998, 99, and 2000. It's because there was such an enormous deficit of heat. It took a long time for the recharging to take place, leaving cold conditions below the surface that favored the multiple year La Nina event. Okay, so next slide, please. Yes, so now 2020 to 2022 does not look like at all like what would happen in 1997, 98 to 2000. This relationship between upper ocean heat content and sea surface temperature falls apart in the past 3 years. So this La Nina is not being driven by changes in the upper ocean heat content of the tropical Pacific. Something else must have been at work to produce such a strong series of La Ninas over a 2-year period. So what is that? Next slide. Well, we just published a paper last month, me and a couple of my colleagues from Utah State University. And the argument we're making here is that, I mean, this cannot be driven from internal dynamics of the Pacific. It had to be driven from outside. Now, there are a lot of candidate mechanisms, but the one we're focusing on here are interbasin interactions between the Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and Pacific Ocean. And basically, these interactions take place through changes in the water circulation. We know that ENSO can affect the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans by shifting the sources of atmospheric heating. When you warm up the Eastern Pacific during El Nino, convection shifts eastward. That alters the water circulation, not just in the Pacific, but around the globe. And so it can produce anomalies in the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. But these oceans can also influence the Pacific through development of climate modes in those basins that affect sea surface temperature and the sources of tropical heating. And so, next slide. Yeah, so here's an example of this where the Indian Ocean can affect the Pacific. This is a paper published in Nature Geoscience in 2010 by Takeshi Izumo and his colleagues. And basically what they said was that an Indian Ocean dipole 14 months later can affect the onset or can affect the mature phase of a Pacific El Nino. This picture shows a negative Indian Ocean dipole affecting the onset and the development of El Nino. But by the same token, a positive Indian Ocean dipole in the Indian Ocean can affect the development of La Nina in the Pacific a year later. So we'll file that away. Next slide, please. And what about the Atlantic? Well, here's a paper written in 2009 by Rodriguez Fonseca and collaborators. And the title of this paper is Are Atlantic Ninos Enhancing Pacific ENSO Events in Recent Decades? And I will say that anytime you put a question as the title of your paper, you know the answer. And of course, the answer is, next slide. Yes. And so what they make, the argument they make, and again, this is kind of based on changing the atmospheric, tropical atmospheric heat sources and shifting the water circulation. If you have a warm Atlantic event, an Atlantic Nino, these typically develop in June, July, August, and September. And that little box there is the Atlantic 3 box. If you do a regression of Atlantic 3 sea surface temperatures with temperatures around the tropical belt, you see that there's a simultaneous cooling in the Pacific Ocean. And that's because the warm anomalies in the Atlantic cause ascending air masses and deep convection over that warm water. But then there's a descending motion over the Central Pacific, which accelerates the trade winds and initiates a Bjerknes feedback to cool the surface. And then these Atlantic Ninos, they only last for about 3 or 4 months. As the year goes on, it fades away, but the Bjerknes feedback it's initiated in the Pacific amplifies that cooling and leads to a La Nina in the December, January, February, March period is shown there. So the Atlantic can also affect the development of La Nina in the Pacific. So next slide. So this is a picture from this paper that we just published last month, and what is shown on the right is the entire global tropical belt between about 25 north and 25 south for different seasons. And the first one on the top is September, October, November 2019. And what you notice is that there is a very strong Indian Ocean dipole in the Indian Ocean. This was a record Indian Ocean dipole. We hadn't seen a dipole this strong in 60 years. And as time goes on, we move down to the third panel. The way dipoles evolve with time, the peak season is September, October, November. The warm anomaly in the western Indian Ocean persists for several seasons through wind evaporation SST feedbacks, but the cold anomaly in the east goes away basically because it's being fed by upwelling. And so by March, April, May of 2020, the entire Indian Ocean has become warm. And this results in increased convection, atmospheric convection over the Indian Ocean. It's drawing in air masses from the Pacific, which are accelerating with trade winds. This is initiating a Bjerknes feedback, which after another season or two, we see October, November, December 2020, we now have a La Nina in the Pacific because of that strengthening of the trade winds driven from the Indian Ocean. Okay, and then in June, July, August of 2021, we had a fairly strong Atlantic Niño develop. Now, the Atlantic Niños are not as strong and long-lasting as Pacific El Niños, but it doesn't take much. This is about 0.6 of a degree Celsius over 3 months, and that's a big enough anomaly in the Atlantic to produce ascending air masses over the tropical Atlantic and produce a signature in the Pacific Ocean through an altered Walker circulation. And so this leads to a second-year La Nina, much in the way that the Rodriguez-Fonseca paper described. So next slide, please. Yeah, so it's complicated, you know, but this is a schematic from the paper we just wrote. The bottom shows what typically happens with these multi-year La Ninas. You have a big El Nino. It discharges heat from the equatorial band, leaves a large deficit. It takes a long time to recharge the Pacific with excess heat because of that large deficit. So you have in place conditions that favor not just 1, but 2 years of cold conditions. This obviously did not happen in 2022, and yet we still have a double dip La Nina. And so what we're saying is that the record Indian Ocean dipole event, which evolved into an Indian Ocean basin warming after 1 to 2 seasons, led to an intensification of the easterlies in the equatorial Pacific and led to that first year of La Nina conditions. And then the Atlantic Niño came by in 2021 and basically re-energized the Pacific with a second set of easterlies from the descending air masses and the altered Walker circulation because of the warm anomalies in the tropical Atlantic Ocean. So, anyways, that's one hypothesis for why we had this extended period of cold conditions in the tropical Pacific without an obvious heat content precursor in the Pacific Ocean. So I'm going to end by just saying a few words about where things might be headed. So next slide, please. So here's that picture again I showed you of a kind of composite La Nina based on 60 years of or 70 years of La Ninas. The black line is the average, and the shading is the standard deviation. The blue line is the current situation. And what's interesting is that, after 3 years, most La Ninas, triple dip La Nina is rare. I mean, double dips are fairly common. You can see that the last data point on that blue curve, that's September of 2022. It's outside the range, that standard deviation of the 70 years of La Nina variability, and it's actually trending cold. So next slide. Does this suggest that we're going to have a triple dip La Nina this year? Next slide. And the answer is quite possibly so. These are forecasts that are assembled by the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. There are about 20 groups worldwide who routinely issue ENSO forecasts. This is the IRA's neutral zone. Above that neutral zone, it's a forecast for El Nino, below is for La Nina. And these are forecasts from September 2022 initial conditions. So most of these models are saying that the La Nina conditions that we see now are going to persist into the Northern Hemisphere winter and probably into the Northern Hemisphere spring. It'll probably be ending by Northern Hemisphere spring. And this is NOAA CPC's assessment, which just came out yesterday, timely for this symposium. There's a 75% chance that La Nina conditions will persist into Northern Hemisphere winter, December to February, next December to February, and there's a better than even chance that it will go away by the Northern Hemisphere spring. So, what does that mean? Next slide, please. It means that the climate extremes that we've been experiencing for the past 2 years will continue. And that means more severe drought in the southern and western part of the United States, which is a real problem, both for drinking water supplies, for agriculture, for threat of wildfire, and a whole host of other issues related to extreme drought. And in the Western Pacific, it means more rain. The color code here is blue and green is the likelihood of above normal precipitation. It's not saying how much it's going to rain, but it's saying that you have a 60 or 70% probability of excessive rain over the next 3 months, October, November, December. So this was, actually we're already into October, so but it says that the coming season is going to be a very wet one. And if I showed you the November, December, January plot, it would look very similar. So this kind of pattern is going to be in place as long as the tropical Pacific stays cold. And so with that, I'll end. The next slide, please. So summary, the 2020-2022, that's hard to say, all those 20s. Yeah. Has had major impacts on the climate system around the globe for the past 2 years, and it's caused a number of extreme events in terms of drought and rain, and also marine heat waves. I didn't say anything about those, but there have been marine heat waves in the Pacific that have been driven by this La Nina. Conventional recharge oscillator dynamics fails to explain the onset and persistence of this event. It's not being driven by internal dynamics of the Pacific Ocean. And we hypothesize that interbasin interactions may account for the development of this La Nina, given the very anomalous conditions that preceded it in the Indian Ocean with a record Indian Ocean dipole, and then the subsequent Atlantic Nino in 2021. And then finally, the forecast models and observations suggest this event is going to become a rare triple-dip La Nina, and that the climate extremes that we have seen over the past couple of years will persist for another, 2 seasons. And so with that, I will end, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much for my parent. Very interesting lecture, and there is something interesting to be noted, but we know that the mechanism behind of this triple-dip La Nina is influenced by what happened in the Indian Ocean during 2019, and also what happened in the Atlantic Ocean. So this is very complex mechanism, as explained by the professor. So to explore more, then I invite the participants to give questions. We have modified a little bit the schedule because this is Friday, and we Indonesian participants will have Friday praying time for lunch. So that I invite participants to have a question to Prof. McFadden, maybe about 5 minutes. Prof, there is a question in the chat room. Okay. So the question is there any significant difference of change in the areas affected by La Nina?
Right. You know, it's the average global fingerprint of La Nina is like what I showed on one of the earlier slides. That doesn't mean that every La Nina affects all those regions exactly the same way. And there will be variations from one La Nina to another. But I would say that many of the regions in the globe where we expect La Nina to have an impact, we saw it in 2020 to 2022. I mean, that last slide I showed of the October, November, December forecast for precipitation looks very much like the canonical average over many La Ninas. Now, it won't be one-to-one because, you know, I mean, these are probabilistic forecasts. It doesn't, you know, when you have an El Nino or La Nina, it doesn't guarantee you're going to see that global fingerprint repeated. It just shifts the probability for it to occur. And so there'll be places where there are misses, but there are many, many places where there were hits.
Thank you, Prof. McFadden. The next question from our General Director. How will be the likely occurrence of the El Nino in the next 2 years? Is there more explanation after the first answer?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
After presentation. Okay.
Yeah. You know, the occurrence of La Nina following El Nino is much more reliable than the occurrence of El Nino following La Nina. This is one of the nonlinearities in the system. So, you know, there's what we call atmospheric noise. Atmospheric noise forcing is much more important in the development of El Nino than it is with La Nina. And also atmospheric noise then adds uncertainty to the forecast of the warm side, whereas the cold side is oftentimes driven by the subsurface heat content. So, you know, El Nino is going to happen at some point. We can be sure of that. Whether it's going to be, you know, the end of 2023 when we see a major El Nino, or not major El Nino, whether it's going to be end of 2023 when we see an El Nino event, or 2024, it's hard to say. But yeah, I mean, El Nino will happen again. It's not going away. It doesn't like the cold.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. McFadden. So I'm waiting for the next question from participants. We still have around 2 minutes. So, Prof. McFadden, what is your idea about the role of Pacific decadal oscillation in the context of maintaining this long-lasting La Nina?
What is the role of the Pacific decadal oscillation? Is that some people feel that it's really just the residual of periods when you see more or fewer El Ninos or La Ninas. In fact, the slide I showed earlier of the September 2022 sea surface temperature anomalies in the Pacific Basin or in the globe, but if you focused on the Pacific Basin, you would see a pattern that looked a lot like the Pacific decadal oscillation, which is suggesting that the frequency of La Ninas in this recent period is projecting on a pattern that looks like the PDO. And actually, we just wrote a paper about this in Science last year, and where we laid out the various hypotheses for what the PDO is. And, you know, the leading hypothesis is the null hypothesis, that it's just a residual of the ENSO cycle. When you have, you know, periods of, you know, more El Ninos than La Ninas, you get something that looks like a positive PDO. When you get more a period with more La Ninas and El Ninos, you get something that looks like a negative PDO. There are some other ideas about actual mechanisms on decadal timescale that would produce those patterns. And, I think it's still an active area of research as to what's causing what. We still don't know the answer to that, really. But I would say the leading hypothesis is that ENSO is driving the PDO.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Prof. McFadden. Is there any question from participant? From that. Maybe I have a question.
Yes.
From student. Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting talk, Prof. McFadden. I have a question. You mentioned about the important role of the interbasin connection, especially for Indian Ocean warming, and also the IOD 2019. That maybe it's become a trigger for the triple dip La Nina. But I have another question, maybe related to the Atlantic Ocean condition, whether this triple dip La Nina is also affected by the decreasing trend of the Atlantic Marine overturning circulation, where the observation said that in the last few decades, the AMOC slows down a little bit, although it is not significant.
Yeah.
And there is still debate on that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. What's happening in the Atlantic is very interesting. There has been a 2-decade decline in the amplitude of Atlantic Ninos. And some people attribute this to, the AMOC. But robust Atlantic Nino that was involved in this scenario that I just described. So, yeah, I mean, there are trends in the Atlantic Ocean that are very interesting, tropical Atlantic Ocean that are very interesting that may be related to AMOC variability. But I think, that's I would say, an outstanding question at this point. How those two are connected.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's time to move to the next speaker, Professor McFadden. Thank you very much. Let's give applause to our expert. So the next speaker will be about the Indonesian climate, referring to this current La Nina. There is Dr. Amsari Setiawan from Center for Climate Change Information. Pak Amsari, time is yours, around 20 minutes.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Supari. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang kami hormati Ibu Profesor Vikorita Ernawati, kami hormati pula Pak PLT Deputi Bidang Klimatologi, kemudian Bapak dan Ibu Kapus di lingkungan BMKG. This time we will discuss about the Indonesian climate during triple dip La Nina 2020, 21, and 22. I am Amsari from Center for Climate Change Information, and I will present the result, data processing result by Climate Variability Analysis Division team. So this is our outline for my presentation. So the introduction, ENSO, IOD, and seasurface temperature over Indonesia, and then we discuss about the atmospheric and precipitation response to triple dip La Nina, and close with the ratio. So this is the climate driving force in Indonesia. Maybe I will skip this part because I already know that in Indonesia we affected by El Nino, La Nina in the Pacific, and then dipole mode in Indian Ocean, and also we have a monsoon and other phenomena. So we now focus on next slide. We take a look at the surface temperature anomaly during March, April, May 2020 until June, July, August 2022. So from this seismic temperature anomaly map, we can see the evolution of negative seismic temperature anomaly of El Nino 3.4 region. So we can find out that La Nina signal captured in June, July, August 2020, and they are a little bit weakened in June, July, August 2021, and then strength again in September, October, November 2020. And from this picture, we also can noticeable negative IOD, especially in June, July, August 2021, and DGF 2022, and also June, July, August 2022. Besides that, we know that there are positive sea surface temperature anomaly over Indonesia waters during this period, except for December, January, and February, and also March, April, May 2021 and until 2022. And if we make a graph of ENSO and IOD index, we can notice that there are in June, July, August, and September 2020, La Nina was started, and in the period of April, May, June until July, August, September, there are neutral conditions in this one. Thank you. Senior participant. Okay, and we know that in the right panel there are neutral condition in 2020, and in 2021 there are neutral to negative IOD, and there are neutral to stronger negative IOD in 2022. So we compare where is the El Nino and also the dipole mode. And we make some composite analysis of zonal and meridional wind anomaly over 850 millibars. And we noticed that in this part, maybe I will go through laser pointer, or this is the positive anomaly of zonal wind over Indian Ocean. So we can explain that there are stronger eastward motion over Indian Ocean, and during March, April, May, there are also westward motion on Pacific. And if we take a look the meridional wind anomaly, there are negative meridional wind anomaly over northern part Indonesia, and it means that there are stronger southward motion from Asia to Indonesia. And if we move to another period, June, July, August, and also September, October, November, it's quite interesting. If we take the September, October, November, there are strong westward motion from Indian Ocean, and eastward motion from Indian Ocean, and also westward motion from Pacific. So in Indonesia, like there are active convection because there are more air mass are together, joined together in Indonesia region. And this is the snapshot of the water circulation. We average over equator area, and the red box is in Indonesia region. So from the DGF and also March, April, May, there are stronger than normal rising motion air mass from surface until around 400 millibars. And we can notice that there are also air mass moving from Indian Ocean and also Pacific Ocean together and join together in Indonesia region and make some positive specific humidity anomaly in our region. and this is this continue to June, July, August, and also September, October, and November. There are stronger noticeable positive specific humidity anomaly of our Indonesia region from surface to 400 millibars, especially during June, July, August, and also September, October, November. And if we take a look the seasonal wind from March, April, May 2020, June, July, August 2020, and also September, October, November, we notice that there are we can notice that there are slight cyclonic wind pattern around Indian Ocean and also the South China Sea. And generally, during 2020, there are negative OLR anomaly on almost all Indonesian region, especially in September, October, November. And if we move to 2020, there are massive negative OLR during December, January, February, but a little bit suppressed in March, April, May, and then active again in June, July, August, and also September, October, November. So this is quite interesting that the negative OLR anomaly suppressed one season and then active again. For the 2022, December, January, February, there's still a negative OLR anomaly we can observe in Indonesia region. And again, from March, April, May, a little bit suppressed the convection around Indonesia, but in the northern part and southern part still have a negative OLR anomaly. And then again, in the June, July, August period, they are active again and straightening the negative OLR anomaly. And if we check the monsoon index, in the left is the ASEAN monsoon index, Western North Pacific monsoon index, and the Australian monsoon index on the right panel, we can find out that ASEAN monsoon were weaker in December, January, February 2020 and 2021, and stronger again in 2022. But for Australian monsoon, is stronger than normal in June, July, August during 2020, and but weaker in June, July, August 2020 and 2022. So weaker Australian monsoon may be associated with positive anomaly during June, July, August 2021 in Indonesia. So if we take the previous research by Pak Supari, there are identifying the impact of La Nina over Indonesia. In June, July, August, there are clear response that La Nina will be impact to increase rainfall anomaly over Indonesia, but in September, October, November, there will be focus on the eastern and also central part of Indonesia. But in DGF and also MAM, there are mixed response observed during this time. So especially in central part of Indonesia, they are increasing, but in another, there are prior response to La Nina. And this is our analysis about the percent to normal precipitation anomaly during triple La Nina. So the start from March, April, May 2020, there are during early years of triple La Nina, Indonesia generally experience normal to above normal precipitation, but in some places, such kind of Sumatra and Java Island, Kalimantan and Papua, they have experienced normal to below normal precipitation for the first years. And this is the second years of La Nina. We can find out that there are generally experienced normal to above normal precipitation, except for December, January, February 2021 and 2022. This is generally normal to below normal precipitation. In March, April, May also shows similar result, but in June, July, and August, and also September, October, November, there are above normal precipitation again. And it's continued to 2022. There are normal to above normal precipitation rainfall, especially in June, July, August 2022. So this is the ratio that triple dip La Nina that occurs from 2020 until 2022 is still happening until now. And the positive sea surface temperature of our Indonesia waters occurs during this period, except for December, January, February, and also March, April, May 2021 and until 2022. IOD in neutral condition IOD in 2022. And from cyclonic wind pattern emerged over southern part of Nusa Tenggara and southwestern Indian Ocean and also South China Sea during this triple dip La Nina. ASEAN monsoon were weaker in TGF, stronger in February, and has delayed onset on ASEAN monsoon. While Australian monsoon were stronger in GGA, weaker in GGA 2021 until 2022, and has a relatively similar onset. Stronger eastward flow from Indian Ocean, West Sumatra, and stronger westward flow from Pacific over northern Indonesia may lead to negative oil air anomaly over Indonesia, and triple dip La Nina impact on precipitation over Indonesia generally shows noticeable wet anomaly especially in June, July, August, and September, October, November, but mixed response during DGF and AM in some areas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ansari from BMKG, presenting about the atmospheric response of Indonesia during this triple La Nina. So I noticed that Pak Ansari highlight about the stronger westward atmospheric flow from Pacific Ocean during the current La Nina, and also a weather condition of Indonesia almost over whole of the country during GGA and SON in 2020, 21, and 22. So thank you, Pak Ansari. Now it's session for discussion. 5 minutes. I'm inviting participants to deliver the questions. I also invite a comment from our experts. So please, Professor Michael. Yeah.
So the rainfall anomalies are very impressive in those two seasons. What can you say about the societal impacts of those? I mean, did these lead to, significant disruptions in, agriculture or, commerce, or, I mean, were many people affected, and how damaging was it from a societal point of view?
Okay, thank you very much, your question, Prof. Generally, Indonesia besides the negative of the triple dip La Nina, Indonesia also have the positive impact that we increase the agricultural product, but in other side we suffer from hydrometeorological disaster. So I think it's a very variation between each region to another region. So it's very impact on social also.
it would be very interesting to try to make an assessment of, the positives and the negatives as a measure of, the impact of climate variability on, the local population.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, please, Rosina,
Yeah. To follow Mike's question, the each triangle you show the seasonal precipitation anomaly is the 3 months mean, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any information of the precipitation distribution? I guess to help assess the impact of precipitation, in addition to the mean precipitation, it's probably also useful to see the extreme precipitation, how the extreme precipitation change during those seasons, during the evolution of ENSO, for example.
Okay, thank you. So this year we have the new normal period from 91 to until 2020 about the precipitation, seasonal precipitation, also monthly precipitation. We inform to our users and society this new normal because previously we have the 81 until 2000 normal precipitation, and we updated using 91 and until 2000. And this anomaly precipitation map also produced using a new precipitation normal. So that's it. That's it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe Prof. Chidong also request about what is the extreme during La Nina compared with the extreme during, let's say, non-La Nina years. Is there any result of this analysis?
For this time, we not yet prepare the map, so maybe we can discuss it later.
Okay, thanks, Pak Sari. Prof. Chidong, just try to respond this question. Actually, we have published the response of extreme index during La Nina and ENSO years. So in terms of consecutive wet days, let's say, for example, this is a larger number during La Nina years compared to the neutral years. We have a publication of that. Yeah, thank you. We are still waiting question from the participant, from online participants. Or we invite Pak Siti. Do you have any comment on this climate conditions in Indonesia? Okay. Okay. So thank you, Pak Amsari. Let's give applause to the speaker, and we will move to the next speaker. This Professor Sidong is expert on the MGO, so, and also will deliver about the MGO. Prof. Sidong, thanks.
Thank you. Very glad to have this opportunity to present you very timely subject of MGO behavior during La Nina years. So, okay, so we can go directly to the next slide. So, in terms of MGO behavior in La Nina years, I want to put this subject in a broader context. The broader context is how the MGO and ENSO may be connected to each other. So there are several topics that can be covered by this. Number one, we know that MGO can be modulated by ENSO, and this is the topic I'm going to discuss, focus on La Nina. The second one is, as we know, that MGO can influence ENSO development, as Mike mentioned, especially during the development of El Nino. And in my presentation, I'm not going to cover this part. And I mentioned when I respond to Iburita's question about forecast with 2-year lead time I mentioned there's a phenomenon called quasi-biennial oscillation, and that the QPO can modulate ENSO, but this modulation can also be connected to ENSO. So I'm going to discuss a little bit this topic. And then we all know that both ENSO and the MGO can have global impacts to remote areas. And the MGO global impact can be modulated by ENSO conditions. And then when we consider the global impact of MGO and ENSO together, this become a little bit more complicated. So in the rest of my talk, I'm going to follow mainly cover two topics. One is how the MGO behavior might be modulated by ENSO, and how the MGO QPO connection be modulated by ENSO. Next, please. Okay, so you are familiar with this. This is a typical situation of a La Nina. You have a negative SST anomaly in the central to eastern Pacific, and warm SST anomaly toward the maritime continent and western equatorial Pacific. So we all know that the MGO actually tend to develop under the condition of warm SST anomaly. So just by looking at this, and you can basically say the MGO probably stronger over the maritime continent, but cannot propagate too much eastward because the cold SST anomaly along the equator in the central and eastern Pacific. And that actually is the case. Next one. So this is a simple composite of MGO propagation. So on the x-axis is the longitude, and the y-axis is time. So time goes upward. And on the left-hand side is the MGO propagation during El Nino years, and on the right side is La Nina. So the color just represent the anomalies of precipitation, and you can see systematically there's eastward propagation of the MGO. And obviously, the difference between La Nina and El Nino is the MGO does not propagate deep into the Pacific during La Nina, for the reason I just said, because the cold SST anomaly over the central and the eastern equatorial Pacific. So this is a well-known result. Next one, please. All right, and we also know that even during the neutral year, without La Nina or El Nino, the MGO eastward propagation is not always the same. On the top, you can see that is the typical MGO propagation. The blue color represents the positive anomaly of precipitation related to MGO. They start from Indian Ocean, propagate over the maritime continent into the Pacific Ocean. So that's a typical. The bottom, if you click the arrow in the bottom, yep. This is another type of MGO propagation, and you can also see the blue color start over the Indian Ocean and propagate eastward over the maritime continent. But after that, you don't see much. It does not propagate through. It does not propagate into the Pacific at all. And this has nothing to do with ENSO. It's just very typical. And this is what we call the barrier effect of the maritime continent on the MGO. And it is still a research topic to understand why there is such a barrier effect, why MGO sometimes cannot propagate over the maritime continent. Up to 40% of the MGO event formed over the Indian Ocean cannot propagate it through. So it's a big phenomenon. So I'm going to term this type of MGO called MGO-B. That's mean MGO being blocked, and the regular MGO that propagate over through the maritime continent, I would call MGO-C. That's MGO crossing the maritime continent. So this barrier effect exists. I can spend the entire afternoon talk about barrier effect, but what I want to show you the next one is, if you compare this barrier effect, next one, please. With the ENSO effect, you find a lot of similarities. Yeah, so on the right-hand side, you have the barrier effect. That has nothing to do with insult. So on the sometimes MGO just cannot propagate through the maritime continent. And you look at the La Nina, El Nino to the right, you find the same pattern, right? So there's similarity, but as I said, the barrier effect exists independent of El Nino. So it's not completely due to La Nina. So what's going on here? Next one, please. So turns out that the barrier effect, as I said, has nothing to do with La Nina and El Nino. So this table shows the percentage of MJO that can or cannot propagate through the maritime continent. So for all year, we have the data for only 18 years because we use the satellite, high resolution satellite to track the MJO. It's only 18 years. So the sample size is relatively small. And the tracking method sometimes overestimate the number of MJO. But in any case, you can see MJOC is about that MJO can propagate crossing the maritime continent is about 57%, and the other 43% cannot propagate through. Then you break down into El Nino year and the La Nina year, you see the percentage remain about the same. It does not change that much. So just emphasize that El Nino and La Nina does not affect the barrier effect. Next one, please. Okay, so however, La Nina and El Nino does affect the strength of the MJO event. So this scatter diagram to the left is using the an MJO index based on outgoing long wave radiation. So the negative represents strong MJO, the positive represents weak MJO, and vertical is the Nino 3.4 index. So positive is El Nino, negative is La Nina. And you can see the distribution of MJO events. So when you have a La Nina year, during the La Nina years, MJO tend to be stronger than during the El Nino year. And there's also on the right, there's also a tendency for MJO to last longer in La Nina than in El Nino. Now you ask, wait a minute, we just saw the MJO cannot propagate too much into the Pacific. And how come the MJO lasts longer? Right, it's all because the different way to measure MJO. So I will explain to you. Next one, please. Yeah, so this is a busy figure. It presents you how we identify the MJO behavior using a tracking method. So if you look at the top panels, each line represents the track of each individual MJO events. And the way we track it is, you see that blue circle, that represents the area covered by MJO precipitation. So it starts from the Indian Ocean and gradually propagate eastward. So the top panel on the left is for El Nino, on the right is for La Nina. And you can see in this case, the dot represent the location of MJO initiation. So during La Nina years, you find there's more MJO initiated over the Indian Ocean than during El Nino. And let's skip the second row and go directly down to the bottom. The bottom shows the rainfall, total rainfall, contributed only by the MJO, right? Because you can isolate the MJO rainfall. And what you see is over the maritime continent, the MJO related rainfall is higher in La Nina than in El Nino. And that explains why MJO tend to be stronger during La Nina years than during the El Ninos, because it is stronger, especially over the maritime continent. So still, I haven't answered the question that why it is stronger, lasts longer, but it cannot propagate into the Pacific. So that statement is not 100% correct. If you look at those tracks, you'll find one difference is during La Nina years, the MJO track shifts southward along the Southern Pacific Convergence Zone (SPCZ), because along the equator, the SST is too low; it cannot survive. But away from the equator, you have the positive SST anomaly that still can support eastward propagation. But most of the MGO index focus on the equatorial region. So if you only look at the equatorial region, you will see MGO does not propagate into the Pacific. But you look beyond the equatorial region to the southern hemisphere, you can see MGO can still propagate to the Pacific, but it's away from the equator, and that has a that has an interesting consequence, because as I mentioned, that MGO can influence ENSO development, especially El Nino development, but it does not influence the La Nina development. And one possibility for this asymmetry is during La Nina years, MGO is too much away from the equator. So it does not have this impact on the equatorial upwelling or equatorial caravan wave, ocean caravan wave. So that's just one possibility. Yeah, next one. Okay, now I'm going to shift gear talking about quasi-biennial oscillation. And for those who are not familiar with the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation QBO is simply the oscillation in terms of zonal wind and the temperature in the stratosphere. So if you focus on the left-hand side, you have the two colors. The blue color represents the easterly wind anomaly, zonal wind anomaly, and the brown color represents the westerly wind anomaly. And you can see about every 2 years, the anomalies start from very high altitude, about 10 hectopascal, and then gradually descend toward the tropopause as time goes, and reach tropopause about 100 hectopascals, and then another cycle start. The different anomaly, opposite anomaly start from the upper stratosphere and going downward again, and this repeat approximately every 2 years. And on the right-hand side is the corresponding temperature anomalies. So the red color represents the warm anomaly, and blue color represents the cold anomaly. You can see similar pattern. It starts from upper stratosphere and propagating downward and reach the troposphere. And this happens approximately every 2 years. So that's why it's called the quasi-biennial oscillation. And this is known to can modulate the MGO. Next slide, please. So generally speaking, during the easterly anomaly phase of the QBO, sometimes we label it as a QBOE, and some people label it as the E QBO is the same as long as I have an E, and then that means eastward zonal wind anomaly. During the east phase, the MGO can be stronger and move further into the Pacific, and during the west phase of QBO is the opposite. The MGO tend to be weaker, and the eastward propagation is more confined. Next slide, please. And so this one just give you the statistical results. So each bar represents the end longitude of the MGO, and the red represents the MGO where the MGO ends during the west phase of the QBO. And blue color represents where MGO ends during the east phase. So you can see during the east phase, there's many more MGO end in the central and eastern Pacific. The blue color, the blue bar is much higher than the red bar. So this just represents the influence of MGO by QBO. Next one, please. And the funny thing is, again, if you compare this QBO effect on the MGO with ENSO effect, again, they look very similar, right? So top, you can see during the QBO westerly phase, compare with the bottom, the QBO east phase on the right-hand side. You know, the west phase, the MGO does not propagate deep into the Pacific, and the east phase, MGO can propagate deep into the Pacific. It's very similar as La Nina and El Nino. So are they related? As a matter of fact, it may or may not. Let's see the next slides. So this slide shows the possibility when you have easterly phase and westerly phase during El Nino or La Nina years, right? So in all the years, the QBO easterly phase and the west phase is about a 50-50. Yeah, it's very close. However, during El Nino years, you have more chance to have a QBO westerly phase. Or you can see the other word. During the QBO westerly phase, you have more chance to have El Nino. You know, there's no cultural relationship here, it's just the pure statistics. During La Nina is similar, but not as strong as El Nino. If you put those things together, you'll find very interesting results. Next one, please. So these are the combination of ENSO and QBO. The top left is again, this is MGO propagation, right? So on the top left is during El Nino and QBO east phase. The top right is during El Nino and QBO westerly phase. The bottom left is during La Nina, QBO east phase. And the bottom right is La Nina during QBO westerly phase. If you look at this, the three panels, the upper two and the lower left panel looks similar. They all have a signal of MGO propagated into the Pacific. But if you look at the lower right panel, that gives you a very clear difference from the others. During La Nina and QBO westerly phase, MGO propagated into the Pacific is much bigger than general, than other cases. And this is stand out as a very strong signal. All right, so what does that mean? Next, please. Well, this is the QBO signal. So again, the brown represent westerly anomaly, the blue represent easterly anomaly, and we can see that this, as I showed before, all those anomalies descend from upper stratosphere down to the tropopause. And at the very end of this this plot is 2022 September, right, last month. And you can see that we are in the transition phase into a QBO westerly anomaly. And also we know that we are going into La Nina years. Remember, what's the combination of La Nina and QBO? The MGO does not propagate into the Pacific. So that's what we can anticipate. So I'm going to quick summarize. Next one, please. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, so very quickly summarize. During La Nina years, more MGO events are initiated over the Indian Ocean, and the barrier effect are not affected by La Nina. And the total precipitation due to MGO tend to be stronger over the maritime continent, and the MGO propagate into the Pacific is limited, and this limitation of MGO propagation is particularly strong during the QBO westerly phase. And so this is my prediction. We're going to have a very limited MGO propagation into the Pacific in the coming winter, but probably more MGO related rainfall over the maritime continent. So next year in Lake Tabo, you can prove me wrong or prove me right. Yeah, that's all my talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Sirong. Very interesting presentations about the MGOs. So I need to hear that more initiation of MGO in Indian Oceans during La Nina years, and also a role of the QBO on the behavior of the La Nina. And we anticipate to the next season of with MGO. Okay, so it's time to discuss. Yeah, Prof, yeah, Prof. Michael.
Yeah, so that was a nice presentation, Chidong. Does it rain more during the MJO over Indonesia during La Nina because the SSTs are warmer in the region?
Yeah, that's the part of the reason.
Okay, yeah. Okay, and so I wonder, putting your talk together with your talk, how much of the rainfall during this double dip La Nina was associated with the MJO? I mean, if you looked at the total precipitation in different frequency bands, would that be primarily the accumulation from MJO events, or is it other kinds of weather patterns? Yeah, so that would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I would say it's probably a combination.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a combination, but quantitatively, yeah, how much of that is MJO related versus just other large scale or small scale kind of variability?
So you can either do a Fourier transform doing the band pass, or simply count the rainfall duration, right? So set up a threshold, and once the rainfall is above threshold, see how long it lasts. So you can do all different kind of things.
So let's write a paper together on that. That'd be a fun little project.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you can run the statistics, we can work with you on interpretation, and we make a nice little paper together.
There is a chance of collaboration, Pak Ansari. You have to take this one.
So we have Indonesian rainfall, MJO, and ENSO.
That's right.
Yeah. Winning combination every time.
And QBO.
And QBO, right? And QBO, right?
Nice. I think it will be a kind of success of this symposium if we can publish this kind of research. Okay, so I'm still waiting for the participants. We have still 5 minutes. Okay, Pak Suwanto? Yeah, please.
Yeah, if there are no questions from the chat box, then I have a question. Very nice talk, Prof. Sidong. I have a question regarding the maritime continent barrier to the MGO propagation. It seems that from your presentation that MC barrier for the MGO propagation is independently regardless the El Nino condition or La Nina condition. Do you think that this barrier more coming from the topography of the maritime continent or the sea surface temperature in the region?
Yeah, very good question. That's what I said. I can spend the entire afternoon talking about. Yeah. So I remember I gave a lecture in 2019 on this topic. So based on current research, the mountain topography is not a reason. So if you run a model and you remove the topography but keep the land, the MGO propagation in the model does not change much. But if you remove the land, replace the land with water, the MGO propagation is very different. So based on this, the hypothesis is probably the evaporation from the ocean plays a more important role than the topography interference with the circulation. The SST is another possible effect. So if you compare the two types of MGO events, one is the crossing, one is blocking, you will find that the crossing MGO event, even before the MGO reach the maritime continent, the SST in this region is higher. So at least this is two possible effects. Then there's another possible effect. It's more complicated. It's about diurnal cycle. Yeah, we know that over the maritime continent, diurnal cycle is very strong, right? Diurnal cycle consume water vapor. And if you look at the MGO related precipitation, it's more over water than over land. Okay, so this gives us an idea. If diurnal cycle is very strong, most rainfall are over land. It prevents the convection to form over water. And within the MGO precipitation, there's a very important element. It's called mesoscale convective system. Yeah, so MGO heavily depend on the mesoscale convective system over water. But if precipitation is too strong over land, it does not leave enough moisture to form the mesoscale conduct the system over water. So that probably weakened the MGO signal. Those are all just hypotheses. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Sidong. Sorry. Thank you, Prof. Sidong, for the comprehensive explanation about the role of maritime continent and the barrier for the NGO block. I don't have question from the Zoom platform, so maybe we will have will end the sessions. So I just got confirmation from the committee that Dr. Wasila is not able to join us. So the second session will be end with Prof. Sidong presentations, and so before closing the second sessions, Prof. Sidong, I sent the greeting from Professor Fredolin Taime from Malaysia. He is in Jakarta actually for another agenda, and I informed him that Prof. Sidong will be in BMKG, and he sent a greeting for Professor Sidong.
Thank you.
So this is the
supervisor.
Yeah, my supervisor. So the next agenda will be concluding remarks will be led by Brunelli and by MC. So I will pass the session to the MC, Pak Ami. Thanks.
Okay. For also allowed to ask to the committee if you didn't get the chance in this Zoom platform, that will be a response next. Thank you, Dr. Supari, Mr. Siswanto, Professor Mike McFadden, Dr. Ansari Setiawan, also Professor Chidong Zhang, for the inspiring session. Let us give all the thanks to our speakers, moderators, and rapporteur of this session. Honorable Ibu Professor Kamawati, ladies and gentlemen, the end of this session is approaching. It is time to conclude the symposium. In this regard, we would like to invite the Director General of BMKG, Ibu Profesor Dwi Korita Kamawati, to conclude the session. Ibu Profesor Dwi Korita Kamawati, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mbak Ami. Also, thanks a lot for all the great, excellent, comprehensive, meaningful presentations by all colleagues, the professors from NOAA, as well as the colleague from BMKG. I really learned a lot of things within a few hours. It's amazing. And at the same time, I noticed that Dr. Nelly Florida is preparing a summary of this. And to be frankly, we are still preparing a letter to be written to the president to give the climate outlook and some recommendation to be prepared for 2023. And these lectures, I request to some of colleagues make summarize and add into the letter in order to provide more comprehensive understanding, not only to the presidents, but also to the leaders of provinces or agencies, to make them more understand and allow them to have more appropriate decision how to prepare or to be ready for the upcoming extreme weather conditions. So again, thank you very much. And there are still some knowledge that seems need to be further developed together So that's why the idea for joint paper writing need to be materialized, make it happen. And I believe that paper can be very meaningful to be put into practice. So all the discussion, knowledge that presented, it's really which frequently asked by many. It's not only by the president, not only by the leaders, but also by the people. Always, we have many times of dialogue, public outreach, public communication. And there are several questions that it is not easy to be answered because we don't have enough information, enough data, enough knowledge on that. And it seems from the discussion, from the presentation, and the current research conducted by the experts just presented, it's really the answer for that. So we are waiting for or dreaming to have the continuation of that, and some of the findings we would like to ask permission to be explained to the president, to the government, and some other we need to continue. That's all. Hopefully through these efforts we do the truly Iqra, that's in Arabic language, which means read. That's the God say to us people, the umat of our Prophet Muhammad, starting the knowledge by Iqra, mentioned several times. Iqra, Iqra means read, observe, analyze. So this is Friday praying time, the holy time. We do Iqra together. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Terima kasih. Thank you very much for all.
Honorable Ibu Professor Karmawati, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of this symposium. We will have during today's symposium. We will gain some interesting points from the presentation and discussion. As highlighted before by our speakers, I hope this opportunity can provide us with new insights and understanding that can be beneficial in the weather climate operation as well as the research we conduct. Ladies and gentlemen, such an inspiring symposium we had. Before we call it a day, I would like to inform the participants and call audience that the attendance list has been provided in the chat room. We were invited to fill it in order to process the certificate of attendance. This link will be closed in 1 hour after the session ended. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am Nurahani on behalf of the organizing committee. I would like to express my deepest gratitude for all guests, speakers, moderators, and participants for attendance and active participation. Stay safe and healthy, and see you next time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih, thank you, Dr. Sydney, Professor Mike Feden, Professor Chidong, all of you, the colleague BMKG, thanks all. See you soon. Bye-bye. Yes.